Hello,
No, mate, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, not bad, are you?
Excellent.
Cheers for agreeing to do this.
That's good. No, looking forward to it.
Good stuff. Whereabouts are you again?
So I'm in Melbourne, in Australia.
Oh,
I've
okay.
been here about 4.5 years. Yeah, just at home. Sort of 7:30 at night. Had a big pasta for dinner, so I'm just slightly carved out. Just got my 4-year-old to bed, so usually the time where I zonk out in front of the TV.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've got a 3.5-year-old, so I know what you mean. That moment after they've finally gone to bed, yeah.
This beautiful moment.
Yeah, I suppose we'll get into it, but like what took you over there type thing.
Well, my wife's from Queensland, so not from around here, but from Australia. We met 2010, got married 5 years after that. But the very short answer that we chose to move here was Brexit, um, sadly enough. But yeah, we just got to a point where I was seriously thinking about leaving the band, um, and we were thinking about starting a family. And the sort of the future was pretty bleak. My wife works in TV. She does sort of creative industries, so she does styling for TV ads mainly. So that the creative industries just took a massive hit, and it just wasn't looking good. That wasn't really why I left the band. I was left the band for just because I wanted to move on and do something else in my life. But you know, it sort of didn't look good for being in a band either. So yeah, we were in London. My wife couldn't really live anywhere outside London because of the industry. And we just started thinking further and further and further afield, and Australia just seemed like a pretty sensible choice.
Yeah, I'm a bit jealous to be fair, but it's great for having like a kid that age as well. You can just be outside all the time and stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be fair, Melbourne's weather is not great, which I wasn't. No one told me about that when I moved here. Like we came as like a trial run 2018 that summer. So the summer here, January, February, March. And it was like an amazing summer, but we just had no context for that and just was like, oh, Melbourne must be just like some time, like because Australia is sunny. We just had friends here, so we were visiting. But they didn't sort of say, well, from basically May till November, it's grim. It's just like being in
Right.
the UK, just rainy and wet. It's not as cold, but it's still not great. So we're in the depths of that right now. But having said that, yeah, it's a great place to have a kid. I mean, we're in our areas. I mean, I know Neighbours is filmed in Melbourne, but there's a definite like Ramsey Street vibe. It's like this weird little bubble. Everyone knows each other and just feels really safe. And yeah, it's not good place to have a family.
Yes, yeah, sounds good. Um, yeah, if we should take it right back then, Lucas, like to those early days, just kind of an overall kind of question, like how did you start the band and how did you go from that point to like getting record interest and stuff?
Um, I mean, I guess it started when we all went to uni. I mean, we all met at uni, which is Newcastle Uni. I went to uni in '96, just kind of showing my age, but
Where are you from originally
we
then?
were. I'm originally from Huddersfield.
Ah, okay, hence your post about Neil Warnock, yeah.
Yes, yeah, um, and the we all sort of went to uni around the same time. So I think Dunks went a year before, or the same year as me, and then probably Paul and Tom were a year or two after. And we were sort of we all immediately, I think maybe even Paul, but we were all in bands of various sorts to sort of keep it fairly short, and then we all our bands kind of disbanded around the kind of 99 2000 point. mainly because people graduated and left Newcastle. I stayed. I loved Newcastle. It was a great place to be, young and not have to earn much money. But yeah, so we were just kind of knocking around. There was Archer's, his bass player, Doug, guitar player, Tom, drummer, and me. So originally it was us four. Paul wasn't in the band at that point. We were called Maximo Park, and kind of Duncan and Archers were the kind of joint singers. There was this sort of Gomez, that's a terrible reference, but sort of I get more. Let's think more Sonic Youth. Actually, let's go for a better. Let's go for a better reference. Sort of dual singers vibe. Sounding quite different. I mean, we liked bands like Pavement, Super Furry Animals, sort of odd indie, and we started to get a little bit of traction, like more than any bands we've been in before, which has essentially been like student bands. And I think the pinnacle of that era was when we played Diesel U Music, which was like a platform sponsored by Diesel for new bands, and you sort of submitted your CD, and you were judged if you were good enough to go through, and we played sort of the final gig, which that year was in Fabric. And yeah, it was it sort of like broke us basically. We hired a van, our own minibus, to go down, and I'd done all the driving. And just as we got into London, Archers, who bless him was not the best driver, decided that he was going to drive. And naively, we said, "Oh yeah, you can drive," because there was only two of us who qualified to have licenses to drive it, I think. And in London, for those who don't know, that there's these terrible bollards that are basically at the top of a bell that you can barely see them because they're not very high. And especially around, I think, Spitalfields and not Spitalfields, sorry, where Smithfields, where Fabric is, there was quite a few of them. And he ended up driving over one of these bollards and bent the chassis of the minibus. So when we got back, we basically tried to do a runner and sort of say, "Here's your van, see ya." And they clocked it straight away. And it was on Archer's credit card, actually. So we sort of let him take the hit. But it was just quite a stressful thing to do. And I think it made us realize that we were sort of missing something. And we kind of wanted Archers to be the front man, but he just didn't want to do it, but he couldn't sort of bring himself to say he didn't want to do it. I remember that we sort of were saying, like, "You've got to wear your best shirt, like wear your best shirt, you've got to go on stage, it's rock and roll, wear something that looks good." And he was like, "Okay." And just before we went on stage, I don't know how he did it so quickly, he pulled on his old shirt they'd been wearing all day. It had like a fried egg stain down the front of it, and went on stage, and we were just like, "Yeah, something's got to change." So then we sort of thought, well, we need someone who wants to be a frontman, or who can be a frontman, who can do that role. And we did this weird thing where this decision was, we sort of thought, oh, we'll audition singers, which is such a weird thing. It feels like a very professional thing to do. Which we were like, well, how else are we going to get a singer in? And we had ideas of singers, and there was a girl in particular that we had in mind, but we thought, oh, we're not used to auditioning singers. We'll have a sort of warm up with someone who, doesn't probably want to do it, and just as a dry run. And Tom knew Paul vaguely, and he recommended Paul because he said he'd seen him in a club, which was there's a club that was playing like soul and funk music, and he'd heard him singing just to himself on the dance floor, singing to Stevie Wonder, and was like, "Geez, this guy could sing." Paul wasn't a singer; he was in instrumental bands. He was into Slint and sort of post rock stuff like that. So he was in this kind of instrumental. Like, to me at the time, I was like, oh, it just sounds like the quiet bits of Mogwai. Yeah, that's my narrow-mindedness at the time. But yeah, it was like he just came in, but he put a lot of effort in and like learned lyrics and stuff. But it was just one of those moments where we're like, holy shit, this guy is an incredible singer, and just like he can just absolutely nail it. You know, he's got charisma. So it was just really natural, and that fell into place. And then, so that must have been 2003, I guess. And then we had this idea of like, we started to do gigs, and from the first gig, it was like, yeah, this is what we wanted to do. You know, this is the kind of band that we want to make. And we deliberately changed the songwriting as well, because we sort of had, as I said, this experience where we just hadn't connected with the audience, and we were like, well, what can we do to sort of do something about that? And so it was just to write kind of more snappier, faster, succinct songs, because our songs have been quite slow and deliberately meandering, kind of shambolic, because that's kind of what we thought, what we liked, you know, kind of pavements and things. And so all kind of those two things coming together, the change of songwriting and Paul, kind of immediately had an impact from the first gig onwards. So yeah, that was when things started to, or when we in our own heads realized we could do something. But I guess then the next thing was like, oh, we're in Newcastle, no one's going to take any notice of us. We all have to move to London. You know, it's like this. So that's what you do. That's what the industry wants. So, so that was the plan, and I ended up being the first one to go, because me and my girlfriend at the time didn't really like our jobs, and moving to London and getting a new job seemed like a good idea, and ended up living in Paddington. And in the end, the guys didn't have to move down, because things happened quite quickly after that. I think I moved down early 2003, and I was probably actually like late, about September 2003, and we signed a deal. You know, within a year, I was back in Newcastle, and we were fully fledged signed band. But that year being in London, I was like managing the band basically. It was an incredible year to be in London and to be part of the music industry in some way. You know, all the gigs, all the clubs, all the new bands, all the releases that were happening at that time. I have very fond memories. But the thing that sort of got us noticed was that we did a red clear vinyl 7-inch. That was like our first kind of release that we put together. It was like self-funded. There was a friend of ours called John, who is older than us. He was touring in punk bands in the early 80s, and he kind of cottoned on to us when we were gigging around Newcastle, and he was a big fan, and he loved bands like Buzzcocks and Magazine, sort of quite kind of erudite, but still very poppy post-punk. And he was like, you're absolutely nailing this, and you know, these are my favorite bands. And so he gave us a few £100 basically, and said, look, I want you to do something. I want you to record something. I want you to put it on vinyl, and I want it to be clear red vinyl. So we were like, okay. And so I had, I can't remember, 100 we did, or was it 200? And so I had them in London. I was basically just running around London. I think I gave Rough Trade West 50, and they rang me 2 days later and said, we need another 50. And then I was at Rough Trade East. I can't remember what the record shop was called, where Mick Shiner at 679 up on the Holloway Road. He took 10 or 20, and they sold out. It was a mad thing when I walked around. So I ended up meeting loads of people. There was a radio plugger called Wolfie. who worked in office with Ritu, who did press, and they kind of helped me out for free. And then an A&R guy, can't remember his name actually, but he was just working for Warp briefly at the time, and it was he ended up us and Gravenhurst signed to Warp. But yeah, Warp gave us a ring, and we'd sort of had a little bit of vague interest. I think some labels, one or two labels, I can't really remember, and said, we'll put out a single. But Warp were like 3-album deal, sort of quite straight up. So to have a label like Warp ring was amazing. And when we got talking to them, they were very down to earth. We had serious interest from EMI just sort of shortly after. And it was like chalk and cheese, like talking to these two labels was just, EMI, I can't remember the NL's guy's name. He was like, I really like Apply Some Pressure, but I think we need to move the chorus forward. And we were just like, nah, no way. But yeah, Warp with it, they just had a very sensible approach. Just like, look, we're not going to shower you with money. We're just, we'll give you enough money to live, and we'll put some money into a record, and we'll push it as hard as we can, and see how much it sells, and then we'll do another one, and we'll just kind of this. It just felt very genuine and very natural. It wasn't like they were trying to wine and dine us, or basically blow smoke up our asses. So, and at that point we had to get a manager, which was, I think in hindsight, quite difficult for me because I'd sort of been managing the band and then had to sort of just be relegated to being the keyboard player from then on in. But yeah, our management, Steph and Colin at Prolifica, still managed the band because the band was still going. Done an excellent job. But that sort of takes us up to the point where we got signed, I think July 2004. I was just reminded the other day that we got signed on the day that Future had released their debut album, and we signed our label on. It's called the Blinking Eye. It's like one of the bridges that goes over the Tyne Bridge. Just rocked it with a little table with some of the guys from Warp, and we made a cocktail and Newcastle Brown, and signed the contract, and yeah, had a drink.
Yes. Yeah, did you have a good relationship with the other Northeast based bands then?
Yeah, it was really exciting to see the Future Heads do their thing, because they were essentially kind of a year ahead of us in terms of career and stuff. And it was the first time the sort of music industry light had really, really been properly shown on Newcastle for our generation. Kinnicky is probably the band before that I can think of. I'm probably missing something. But Pete Gofton, who was the drummer in Kinnicky, who's Lauren McBurn's brother, he's our age basically. He'd been really young when that band started. But that was all kind of done and dusted, by the time I got, how we were up in Newcastle. When none of us are from Newcastle. Paul's from Middlesbrough, so he's from the Northeast, but so people just can't, obviously he sings with a Northeast accent, so people just sort of assume he's from Newcastle. And the Future Heads were from, they're from Sunderland, and again, it's the Northeast, but there's a distance there. But yeah, we saw them obviously loads of times in the early days, and Field Music was the other band who were kind of, getting some attention. Tom Maximo, drummer, played with Field Music for a little bit, actually, in the very early days. It was just good to see these bands doing really well, and Futureheads were really good to us early on. You know, we supported them quite a few times. In in the first sort of months of our sort of touring life as a signed band. Yeah, we did some amazing shows with them.
Yeah, it is. And then at what point did Paul Epworth come in? Was that after you were signed with Warp or before?
No, that was, yeah, it was after. I mean, we signed in July 2004, and we were in the studio recording with him in October, I think, that year.
Okay.
And we just kind of got introduced to him, I guess, through Warp. I mean, so I think he'd just come off the back of Block. I can't remember the order, but he basically did Block Party, us, and the Rakes in like a 2-month period.
Mm.
And there was one point in our record, we finished recording, and we went to the mastering studio, and Paul Epworth turned up with the rough mixers, and our management were like, why the mixers rough? You're mixing the record. And Paul Epworth was like, am I? There was some confusion. And he basically mixed the record on his laptop in the corridor of the mastering studio, which is obviously not ideal. But I think it just shows how kind of under the pump he was at the time. I mean, he was burning the candle at every end and the middle. But it was amazing. Like, I mean, his enthusiasm, and he was not, he's not much older than us, but he was a couple of years, 2 or 3 years older than us. We were all in it together. He was like, his career was just taking off as well. So, he's just very creative, just has some crazy production ideas, but also really knows a song. Like, he came and he didn't tweak much of our songs, but there was a couple of tweaks or things he wouldn't even tweak them. He'd just say, look, this bit needs work. And then before you know it, you've made what you thought was a good song really good. So yeah, excellent producer.
Yeah, yes. And I was watching the Found on Film, like that mini documentary.
Oh yeah, wow.
And I think I missed, like, there's a quote from you saying about how you learn piano, and something about, there's a story about you throwing a tantrum about demanding piano lessons or something.
Yeah, right. No, it's true. Yeah. I mean, my dad was taught piano as an adult, so and I think he was sort of learning really when I was a kid. But I remember hearing a lot of piano, and then I was just like, I just want to be like Dad and play piano, and had a tantrum and start to learn piano.
Yeah, fair. I thought it was worth mentioning anyway. But yeah, so obviously it becomes like a busy time. Were you playing, like, we speak to bands back from that area who were like just hammering gigs basically? Was that what you were doing, or not really?
Yeah, oh, totally. I mean, it was the done thing. I mean, we did, I think just prior to recording, we did our first little run of gigs as a signed band, just in a minibus. And I think that was, I remember we did a gig with Block Party up in Aberdeen, I think. I think they were headlining and we were supporting, just a tiny gig. But yeah, so just starting off like very small shows, the Lemon Tree, that's what it's called. And then I guess we did the album, and it was sort of coming into Christmas. And then I guess we must have hit the ground running January or February. And we didn't stop we didn't really stop for 3 years. We just basically did album tour, first 3 albums. Yeah.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, like, some Block Party, and obviously like the NME kind of culture back then was massive. Did you have like a good relationship with other bands like that, and like how did you feel like you fit into that NME culture type thing?
Yeah, we didn't want to. I think we deliberately didn't want to fit in and didn't feel like we fit in. I think being from Newcastle, I think being from anywhere outside London, you sort of have a healthy degree of cynicism in terms of music industry. You know, the kind of centralized format that the UK music industry is, where it's very much London based, and most anything coming out of London, we were quite cynical about, basically. But I think that was what was really good about that whole noughties, all those bands, because there was a heavy emphasis on bands not from London and sort of scenes around cities that weren't London. So yeah, it was good to feel like you didn't have to kowtow to that sort of thing. We didn't, as I said, we didn't move to London. I moved back to Newcastle, and that suited us much better than trying to make a go of it in London. I guess, and the NME, it was just really hard. I mean, it felt like it just wasn't that supportive in a way of, it was like there was a lot of, I guess it was about, there was a lifestyle, this rock and roll lifestyle, which again we were quite antithetical, about, and drug taking, like this indie sleaze revival just really gets my goat. It's just, I saw there was the years touring here in Melbourne, and it's not their fault, but the publication, the local listings magazine, said, indie sleaze revival, and I was like, really? That's a brand, that's a thing. But it's weird how this legacy is sort of appearing about indie sleaze. And one of the interviews I've heard you do, which was really interesting, was the Conor McNichols one, where he was talking about trying to brand this scene or this movement, trying to find a brand for it, and how they never could, and it sort of really held it back, which I thought was really interesting. And when you've got this sort of movement that you as a band end up getting lumped into and typecast, I don't think any bands, I guess some could be more circumspect about it, but we just felt like, no, we're just doing our thing. Like, we're not like anyone else, and we don't want to be like anyone else. And especially if it's about rock and roll lifestyle and drugs and alcohol, that was like, that's really old hat. That's not for us. So there was which was a lot of what was going on. So I think, but having said that, like, we got on with some bands really well. I mean, the Rakes were one of the bands that we toured with it when we just played a gig, and before we were signed, I think at Archway Tavern, and we met them, and just instantly clicked. I think we're just same age, just had a similar attitude, quite cynical attitude to sort of what was going on, but had a sense of humor. So that being friends with them for a while now. Maccabees, actually, we met very early on. I can't remember, but again, if we were signed or not signed at that point, but we played at a small pub in Brighton, and they were like the local support. And we were like, oh, this band's pretty good. Like, I mean, at that time, I'm sure they won't mind me saying this, they did sound quite like the Strokes, but I think it's before they sort of had much interest and whatnot. And ended up staying friends with them. I mean, weird connection, but I met my now wife through Orlando. So she knew Orlando, I knew Orlando. We were at Festival 2010, and we met in a car park. And the rest is history. But Orlando's a good lad. So
yes. And then Art Brut, is that another band you played with?
Yeah,
It
of
seems
course.
like kind of like minded with the likes of the Rakes and stuff.
Well, I'm really good friends with Jasper, who was sort of like the second, but the the guitarist really from our group. I think that the original guitarist, Chris Chinchillas, lives in Melbourne, but I've never ever come across him or heard of him. But yeah, Art Brute, we played with. They were just one of those bands that we played with a lot, and we had them on tour with us. You know, and we got them supports. I mean, formed a band is, I think, in my opinion, that sort of it's pretty much that peak in terms of like one of the best, if not the best song. It's not only is it a great song, it sounds incredible. Like production on it's so good. I remember I was working in this is before I was signed, so I was working just off Oxford Street, and I used to go down to HMV there and buy records at my lunchtime. And I formed a band on 7-inch, and I had it. I was living in Paddington, and so the flat above me was the Datsuns. The Datsuns band lived in the flat above me. It was very, very London, 2003, and so I ended up being friends with them. I was like, I'm in a band. And they were like, yeah, whatever. And I think they had a house party, and I played them. Said, "You've got to hear this song. It's amazing. You've got to hear this." And I put on and formed the band, and they were just like really nonplussed. Just like, what is this? And at the time, I was like, that's weird. They just don't get it. But I think in hindsight, they probably they could see what was happening, and it was the death knell of their career, just sort of in front of them. Because I remember they kind of. Well, what I found out later, I guess, is that Datsuns was sort of like when White Stripes happened and the Strokes happened, there was sort of this scrabble, I think, in the UK to find the UK's answer to these types of bands. And the Datsuns, even though they're from New Zealand, I think obviously they were living in London, they kind of got upheld as like, a sort of rock and, this guitar type band that people were looking for. But it was quite 70s influenced, and then like new wave and post-punk kind of became more of a thing, and I think they were just like, yeah, we don't fit in here anymore. Unfortunately for them. But, yeah, I mean there was like Cribs were same management of us for a while, and we played with them a few times early doors. Research was another band that were managed by our management.
Yeah, I remember that, man.
Yeah, excellent band from Wakefield. Yeah. Oh, and then I guess Mystery Jets was another one we got on with quite well. Just had a similar attitude, liked similar things.
Yeah, I've been trying to pin them down, but proven quite
difficult. Really? Yeah,
right. But yeah, just quickly on being in London in 2003, then like how you mentioned like Art Brute and stuff, but how did you feel like you were in the middle of something exciting? Like obviously like bands like the Libertines kicking off at that point and stuff. How into like that side of it were you, or not really? I
mean, I was into it. I mean, I wasn't really a Libertines fan, but I just loved seeing. I mean, I still do. I just love seeing bands. And like, I've always been right from my first gig, pretty much. I've always been like, yeah, but who's the support? Like, who, because that to me is where the gems are found. Yeah, I mean, I saw Razorlight early gig. Franz Ferdinand's probably one of their early gigs in London. There's Frog, big indie night. Death Disco. Nambuka used to put on bands. I'm trying to think of some of the bands that. It was a febrile atmosphere. There was just bands coming out of every doorway and window. I mean, it was like I don't really feel like I'm exaggerating. It was like it was a great time to be in a band, and I don't think we'll ever see the likes of that again, unfortunately. Like my son you know, I mean, we live in Melbourne, and Melbourne's actually got a really good music scene. And I think it will be a good place, you know, if I want my son to get into music, for him to be. I think it would be very supportive, and because I don't think, in terms of like, you know, the music industry, the amount of money in the music industry just doesn't. People spend their money on other things now. You know, the internet's just totally fragmented the music industry among other things. So that coalescing of culture, you know, I just can't see it ever happening again, unfortunately. But yeah, it was a good time. What was that night at the end? Errol Alkan's night.
Trash.
Was another Trash. Yeah, it was really good. Yeah, Tom Beck. I'm just trying to think of things that were around at the time, but I was pretty much seeing bands, you know, every week, if not 2 or 3 every week. It was good. Good time to be alive. Good time to be young.
And so going back to Maximo Park, then in terms of songwriting, did he kind of hit the ground running when Paul got involved?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, we deliberately didn't do a gig for a while. We just wrote and rehearsed, and then we did our first gig was at an indie night called Bulletproof in Newcastle at the Northumbria Uni, and I think we just knew straight away because that gig was like, not that we knew that we were going to, you know, want a career out of it, but just that in terms of the bands we'd been in up to that point, and I think we'd all been in bands for, you know, kind of 6, 7 years, that this was like a notch or 2 above anything we'd been in before. And yeah, so it was just like, okay, you know, we did gigs around Newcastle and kind of did Newcastle. And then we were like, okay, what do we do next? Well, let's try and play in other cities. So we sort of took a week off from work and managed to get gigs in Manchester, Bristol, Leeds, I think we did a gig in London. We toured with friends of mine who were in a band at the time called Fallout Trust, and they went on to be a really good band called the Clock Opera. So that was like uni friends of ours, and we just all got in a van and took a week off work and did our own self-funded tour, which was, yeah, just so much fun. I mean, we played to probably a grand total of like 30 people, but it was more the A, to do it, and B, to sort of put it on a press release, or not even a press release, but to put it on an email or something. So, you know, we did a tour of the UK. Sort of, you know, makes you sound much more important than you actually are. But it just was like, well, this is the next, you know, what do you do when you play at all your local venues, when you try and play outside? And then, you know, then the next thing is, let's do a proper, you know, a funded demo that we release on an actual piece of vinyl. And, you know, we were just sort of, that was the step. So we had this kind of like, what's the next step? What's the next step? And it was just, and the end game wasn't really to get signed. It was just to be in control of it, to get as far as we could, but to kind of maintain control of it as much as possible. I mean, it's kind of easy to say this now, but I really do. Well, I personally think that if Warp hadn't come in and EMI was the only label who'd come in and tried to sign us, I think we would have said no, because it just wasn't. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel like we'd be in control or be able to do what we wanted to do in the way we wanted to do it. So, we were just like, we'll do a vinyl, and then we'll probably do another vinyl, and then we might do like an album, and then we might do another tour. You know, we just had this sort of like step-by-step thing of, you know, essentially getting to release and tour an album, which I guess was kind of our end game.
Yeah. And then am I right in thinking, would it be Duncan and Paul that mainly wrote the songs, but obviously you'd chip in with that? Like, how democratic was like the songwriting process?
Um, oh, it's democratic. Like you could bring a song and it would definitely be considered. It's always been the case. Thing is, Duncan is a machine, and like he's really really creative, a really interesting guitar player who can. And it used to really frustrate me because being a classically trained musician, I'd be like, yeah, but what is that you're playing? You're like, I don't know, it's like this, that, and that. And it's like, yeah, but that's not a chord. So I don't know, but it sounds good. I had to really work hard to sort of drop my the rules of theory that sort of because I actually studied, I studied a bit of music at uni as well, so I was quite like entrenched in classical sort of approach to writing music, which was not helpful in some ways, but I think technically it sort of helped me a little bit to sort of be a bit more, to sort of worm my way. Is that the right way to put it? I remember sort of like being a keyboard player was a little bit funny in a band because you have to really, in a guitar band anyway, you sort of have to push yourself quite hard. And I remember, in fact, that tour that we did, the self-funded tour, we just went around in the bus with Fallout Trust. All the in-house, because it was all in-house engineers, all the in-house engineers would be like, what, you want the keyboards the same volume as the guitar? And they just could not understand that they were like equal. And I think that, there was a bit of hangover. Well, I guess one of the reasons we formed the band as well was that the music just didn't seem very exciting around that kind of late 90s, early 90s point. Thinking of like touring breaks, I remember being big at the time. They were just so naff. And early Coldplay. But I think Britpop as well was quite guilty of just having keyboards in the background. It was like a kind of it was because it was more 60s influence. There was just kind of like organs, pianos, just like chords, just filling up the sound rather than doing anything interesting. And I was like, well, if I'm going to be in a band, I'm going to be a part of it. I'm not just going to like pad out the sound. And I'm one of my favorite bands is Stereolab, which are definitely, well, there's probably keyboards here and guitar down here a bit, but it's sort of, the keyboards are there for a very good reason. They're doing something really interesting all the time. So yeah, it was quite thinking, but I never really thought about it actually. But yeah, I sort of had to stand up for myself as a keyboard player. But yeah, in terms of songs, Paul, it just fell into a natural rhythm where Dunk he's always got material. And then Paul would have a couple and I'd have a couple and then we'd have an album. But yeah, any songs would be seriously considered.
Yeah, cool. And then, on the first album, there ends up being 5 singles, I think. Like, how is that just a case of seeing how it goes? Be like, oh, I may as well just bang another one out type thing. How does it work?
It's a good question. Yeah, I'm not really sure how that kind of. I think, yeah, actually, it's a good question. Yeah, I think there was an initial single, which was like a double A side, really, which was the first thing that Walk put out for us before the record, which was Night I Lost My Head and Coastal Was Changing, I think. And then I guess we had Pressure, Graffiti, and I Want You to Stay. So that's your 5.
Yeah.
So, a bit like that, it's kind of, you had one just prior to album, so you had your double one to sort of create some interest, and it was like, it was a fairly limited release, but it was just like, hey, we're signed to War. And then it was like, Apply Some Pressure, album's coming out next week. And then Graffiti after that. And then I think a bit after that, just to sort of keep momentum, was I Want You to Stay.
Yeah. And you co-write that song, that last one?
Yeah, I Want You to Stay was musically mine. Yeah, it's basically Paul writes the lyrics, so he's always got a credit on every song, and then the music usually comes from Dunk, if not me, if not Paul, or there might be a mashup of. I think me and Dunk have sort of done half a song each and put them together and called it a whole song.
Okay, right. Yeah, because I was going to ask one that you wrote called "Leave This Island." Is that not your lyrics then?
No.
Okay, because I was going to make the link about you leaving the country.
No, but it was in the. No, I mean, it was Brexit was in the air at the time, so I mean, definitely that's a reference. I would say from Paul's point of view.
Yeah.
Not to me personally, but to everyone in the country.
Yeah, Graffiti. I mean, I think Graffiti is probably my favorite song from the band, and I just remember like Zane Lowe playing it a lot, like a real exciting time, kind of. I don't know. I always like to mention Zane Lowe because his show was like really important for me in terms of new music. Like how important, how important were people like him pushing new music? Do you think?
Oh, totally. To have that level of enthusiasm from someone in the industry. Yeah, I mean, it was. I think a lot of it was just very. There was a lot of positivity around. It was like a lot of energy. It was British. It sounded British. There was a lot of local accents going on. So yeah, I think having someone like Zane Lowe with a massive platform. I mean, this is back when videos. People watched. Purposely sat down and watched music videos on TV, which I still think they should do. Actually, in Australia, the equivalent of the BBC, the ABC, they have a regular weekly, bi-weekly show called Rage, which still shows videos on terrestrial TV on Saturday morning. It's brilliant. I don't know why there isn't someone doing that in the UK. I feel like BBC Three. I don't know what it's like now, but there's sort of dead time on BBC Three or one of the BBC online streaming channels show music videos. Like, why would you not do that? Like, and the music industry would bite your hand off, and you'd boost the economy. Like, that's someone needs to do it. So it's blowing my mind why there isn't someone showcasing platforming music videos on a more regular basis. Anyway,
I mean, I suppose people think it's more down to the internet these days, but I agree there isn't that many music-based shows really.
Not on the screen, and there's still people are still making videos. There's some wicked videos out there, and I think like I watched Rage, and there's a lot of bands that are just making their own videos. It's just it's almost like before early directors just going around the camera. I don't know. It feels exciting. Like people are making their art, and it's not about a budget. Yeah, they're good. They're still good to watch.
Yeah. Then like when the first album gets nominated for a Mercury Prize, is that a bit of a surreal moment? Like, what do you remember about that time?
Yeah. I mean, the whole time was surreal a bit, really. I mean, yeah, Mercury's was great. I think there was a lot of similar bands on that list, I would say, in terms of from what I remember. But I guess they couldn't really have had it any other way. It was just, that was what was really going on at the time. Yeah, I mean, it was a good night. You knew we wouldn't win, but I think as a musician, being nominated for a Mercury is brilliant because it feels really credible and it does have an effect. Like especially for a smaller band. I mean, it had an effect for us. We sold more records off the back of it. We got more press and more attention, more fans. So yeah, it was great things happen.
Yeah, and I remember I mentioned the Found on Film documentary because I watched you around that time on the NME New Music Tour. I think he came to Hull and played with the Cribs. And
Yeah.
the band called the Czechs, which can't remember what they were like.
Okay. No.
But
Can't remember.
yeah, like that film's quite interesting. Like it's all filmed on Super 8. Did someone just come to you with the idea of doing that, or did you kind of think it'd be a good idea?
No, it came from the band. Or sort of the sort of the idea of doing something came from the label. I mean, as it happens a lot, it's like we need content. I mean, I guess the word content wasn't used back then, but the label would be like, look, we'd like to do something. We feel like we could do a documentary, blah blah blah. So then it's we would then go, yeah, but how can we make this? How can we sort of make it Maximo, really, like make it kind of different, interesting, sort of have a bit more quality rather than just churning out something that product basically. So yeah, that was, I think Paul probably came up with the idea of filming on Super 8 and doing something a little bit different.
Yeah, one of his quotes during it is like, I think Paul says something like, "Yeah, we just wanted to show we're not crack demons or something."
Yeah,
that kind of removing yourself
this
from
is it.
certain
I think,
aspects.
Yeah, well, I think there's like there's a real kind of cliche. I mean, sort of the Libertines and Pete Doherty are probably a bit responsible for that. But it's like, yeah, if you're in a band, you must be an absolute hedonistic maniac. And Paul basically doesn't drink. So he
Well, like never has done, kind of thing.
He has done. I mean, I don't want to go into too much lurid detail, but he was a big fan of the Smiths and Morrissey growing up. He didn't really drink until he was in the band, really, I think. And I didn't know Paul until really joined the band. I've never met someone who didn't drink, which is again shows how narrow-minded or sort of Shelton or whatever at the time. Obviously, it's a lot more common now, but yeah, it was sort of like what I couldn't understand like why he wouldn't drink, but sort of he was like, well, I don't want to lose control and all these other things. I think he drank a fair amount during the first year of touring, but because he hadn't sort of built up any resistance during his sort of late teen years, like we all do, he would have have one vodka and coke, and it would be really effective. So it turned out he decided it wasn't really a good idea. But he has the odd whiskey now and again, but yeah, it was just like we're not here to party. We're here to write songs that will stand the test of time. That was kind of like what we thought.
Yeah. It's quite I don't know if mature is the right word, but it's quite just knowing what you're all about early on is quite it's quite an advantage kind of thing.
Yeah, I think Paul was I think coming late into the band, he had quite an interesting attitude. Like, he's very much like a lot of singers are like, I want to be famous by hook or by crook, and I'll either be in a band or I'll be an actor or I'll be a presenter. And there was a lot of that going on. Like there was a lot of people who it wasn't really about the band or the music. It was just, I just want to be famous. And Paul was like, I didn't choose to be in this band. Like I didn't go out of my way to be in this band. But now I'm here. Like what's the best thing I can, what's the best thing I can do with it? And he's, fine art student, art school background. Before the band, he was like, well, I think I just want to draw, maybe become, an art professor or something like that. Just kind of live and breathe art. And so that was kind of the attitude that he came with. It's just like, well, I'm not going to be a cliche, and I'm not going to do anything that's kind of throwaway. I'm going to the music art, the music he likes, You know, Morrissey is a good example in terms of lyrics. But then, you know, kind of the post-rock music that he likes, and we, you know, we all had very similar tastes. Like we all had quite a an arty bent, I guess, because we all did an art degree basically of some description. So that was the attitude. It's like we're just going to do something that's going to last. Like it's not about us and careers. You know, we'll end up getting other jobs or whatever it is. But if we're going to do this, let's do something that we could look back on and be proud of, I guess, basically. I mean, we were maybe a bit older than a lot of bands at the time. I think I was 27 when we got signed. And I was just listening briefly to Hugo from the Maccabees interview this morning, and you know, he was saying he was 19 when he got signed. I mean, it's a very different headspace you're in when you're 27 and when you're 19. So maybe that had an effect as well. And yeah, I think we just didn't want to be like eaten up by the music industry. We didn't want to play that game, you know. And there was a lot of bands, especially in London. It felt like you get signed. There was one point where it felt like if you had literally just had half a song, you would get a record deal. And it was just like, this is stupid. Like this is completely not what we're about. So yeah.
Yeah. And then there's like an album of missing songs after the first album. Was that kind of like, I read that was kind of like to capitalize on the success of the first album, or was that how you saw it? Or I don't know.
I think we just had too many good songs. I think, I mean, a lot of them were B-sides, and it felt good to collate them all, because that's the thing. I think when you first start, you just every song is your best song that you're writing. It's just like, and unfortunately, some of them end up being B-sides, and yeah, it's a bit galling because they're all good as far as we're concerned. And yeah, there were other songs that didn't even get to be B-sides, so it just kind of made sense. And yeah, Walk was sort of, I don't know where the idea came from. It's a sort of idea we would have come up with, I think. We were just like, look, we've got all these songs that just kind of, and there was a lot of formats at the time. Like that time was like format wild. Like there was CD A, CD B, vinyl A, vinyl. This is for my single, you know, vinyl A, vinyl B, and every one would have to have a different extra track on. So there was a point where, yeah, we would kind of run out of songs, I guess, and we were writing stuff. But then, you know, you're still writing. Oh, this is good. You know, why is this getting like forgotten about on the fucking, you know, some CD B side? So yeah, it was good to kind of platform the songs that, you know, unless you're an Uber fan collecting every single format, you wouldn't hear it, which felt a shame.
Yeah. And I was watching a bit of the YouTube channel today for the band, and when you first played China, or the only time you played China maybe, but that looked pretty cool. That must have been a bit mad at the time.
Yeah, that was pretty mad because we were there for a week. We only did 2 gigs. That felt a bit mad in itself. We went to Beijing, which was incredible, and yeah, walked on the Great Wall and got to see some culture. Yeah, it was great. I think it was Q magazine, I think, who they went out, took I think there was a British guy who was living in Beijing who was trying to kind of get indie bands to come and play in China, and you know, there's an expat community and there's some local interest, and you know, you might not make much money, but it'll be a good experience. And then I think the fact that we could kind of get a bit of press out of it with the Q journalist that came along, who definitely had a good time. He made the most of his trip. Yeah, that was kind of why that came about. And I think it was at the end of, it was also sort of in a gap where we weren't really touring between albums, probably, or something like that. yeah, it was amazing.
What were the crowds like? 'Cause I've heard different things about like crowds in Asia, like that they're
Oh, they weren't very
really.
good. Yeah,
Oh, really?
I mean, Beijing was less, from what I remember, expat, but still pretty expat. Um, and it wasn't particularly well attended. Neither of the gigs were that well attended, really, and they were quite small. And then Shanghai was definitely more expat, which, yeah, it's just fine, but it's sort of like you go all that way and basically just playing to people on a gap year or who could have seen you
Oh,
anyway in Glastonbury or whatever. So, um, yeah, you didn't really get a sense that you were converting any new fans.
okay, that's interesting. Then there's a couple more from that found on film documentary. Like, I found it funny when it's a story about you'd nicked a head from Pop World or something, and you were like, it looks like the driver. I don't know if you remember all this, but
It does it rings a slight bell. I think I can picture it. I think we might have a picture of it. Is that on found on film? Is it? I think there might be a Polaroid of that
yeah,
head in the booklet.
yeah,
That's what I'm seeing in my head.
it's like a paper mache head in it.
Does it have blue hair?
Yeah, I think it's
Is
bald.
that another head?
I think it's bald, and then that's why you say it looks like the bus driver, but like you're carrying it around like a
Right.
bit of a mascot, I think, for the band. But there's another story about something like someone was claiming to be your sister regularly at gigs or something.
Oh, it's funny you should mention that um, because not that story, but so when I'm studying to be a psychotherapist now, and I did my initial training was in London, and on the course, I met a fellow student, and she said, "Oh, you're not Lukas from Maximo Park, are you?" I said, "Yeah." She's like, "I'm really embarrassed to tell you this, but my husband always says that he's you and gets backstages at festivals."
Right.
So it's not me; it's my sister. So yeah, we obviously opened doors that I didn't even know about.
Oh, so what? It's someone else that was claimed to be a sister.
Well, maybe I can't remember that particular story.
Okay, fair enough.
But yeah, that was someone who saying to me.
And then just in terms of working with different producers, like working with the likes of Gil Norton and Nick Launay, like obviously Gil Norton, so working with the likes of the Pixies, like that must have been a big deal working with him, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we've worked with some really good producers. I mean, what Gil was really good at, among many things. But when we did the second album, we did a week of pre-production, which we'd never had to do. I think the first album is like, and I'm sure most bands concur, is that your songs are basically studio ready because you've been touring it. You've played loads of gigs and you've polished them and honed them. And then you have a strange experience where you then have to record your second album, write songs that you set in stone before you've had a chance to really, work on them in a live format. So we did this thing called pre-production, which was basically a week where he came to Newcastle. We hired a space and we just played songs over and over, and he would, say, "Oh, that bit needs tweaking," or this bit maybe you could swap it around, or maybe we need a bit more of this in that bit. And that was such a good experience, like, because he was incredible. And but he'd also sort of go, I know what you're good at, like I know kind of what makes your sound you. So he sort of enhance or ramp up certain aspects, whether it's the backing vocal or a keyboard sound or the way we segue from one song into the. Actually, yeah, one of the things he was really into was, because we were quite, I guess it's the naivety of songwriters. We just would write a bit of like a verse, and then you go to a bridge or chorus or whatever section you go into, and we just kind of go into it. Whereas he was like, "No, you need to glue them together. You need to have something that helps the flow from one section to another." And I remember him being really big on that, and it just kind of a bit mind blowing. It's like such a small thing, but then it makes such a huge difference. So yeah, working with him was a real eye opener, because he was working us in a different way to what Paul Epworth was doing. Paul Epworth was like, songs are basically up and ready. You just need to make them sound good. And, we'll do some mental things with drums down drain pipes and, synths that don't work properly, and vocals, sang in the corridor or the toilet, whatever. But Gil was like, the production was the production sounded really good. There was a lot of layering of guitars, which we were a bit sort of not sure about. And he also edited all the drums, chopped, basically set them to a grid. His assistant did, which we never did again, which was sort of, again, didn't feel quite right. But yeah, in terms of the songs, just before we went in the studio, yeah, he had all these little weird, funny, not weird, just very clever tricks that he'd learned from, I don't know, 30 years of working with bands.
Yeah.
And then Nick Lawney was on the third album. And he was, I guess, a bit more, he was kind of in the middle a little bit, but he was more of a Paul Epworth, where we did a bit of brief production, but it wasn't really his. I think it was more at our behest than his. And he didn't really, I think at the time actually looking back as well, I think we really needed someone to do pre-production with us on that third album. The songs, I mean, it's a good album, but I don't think it's our best. I think it's a bit undercooked a little bit with the songs. I think we could have really spent a bit more time getting them to where they really could have been. But yeah, Nick Lawney was a really good sonic producer again. And we recorded in LA, which was obviously very exciting. In Jeff Porcaro, the drummer from Toto's house.
All right. Yes.
Which was cool. We had a pool. Yeah, I was in Laurel Canyon. It was we didn't really experience much of LA, but it was a very pleasant experience.
Yeah. So what was going back to this idea of gluing different parts of a song together? What would be an example of that? Like just putting an extra note in or something? Yeah,
just like a little fill of some kind, like drum, whether it be a drum fill or an instrumental fill, or maybe a chord change, vocals, just anything really, just something to sort of, alert the ear to, and something else is about to happen rather than just it happening.
Yeah. Okay. Because I was loving the production on the second one he did with Gil. Some of your songs, like "This Is What Becomes of the Broken Hearted," like the production on that's brilliant.
Yeah, that's a bit epic, that one.
It's quite
really more sort of piano. I guess it's like if Sparks, early Sparks, did a heart-wrenching piano ballad, but like you put it on the wrong speed, like way too fast. But yeah, so there's more piano on that record, as far as from my point of view. But that was fine. That was kind of the idea.
And then did you go like various producers on Too Much Information? Is that right?
That Too Much Information we basically did ourselves, and then we sort of co-mixed it. That's really bad. I've forgotten his name, but we never met him. He was in America, and we also said, you've got free reign really to kind of add in extra, not write bits, but sort of replace sounds. Like he did a few keyboard, change the sounds around a little bit. Like he made the Leave This Island sound, but it was already sounding good, but he added some extra synths in there that just sound incredible. So that was, yeah, that was like a sort of a, I mean, we did the first 3 albums back to back, and we toured them back, you know, and then the third album was 2009. It came out, and even before it came out, the sort of the space between having finished it and mastered it at the end of 2008 and coming out in April or May, whatever it was, in 2009, just the industry had changed. The sort of, I guess looking back, there was a global recession at the end of 2008, but it really felt like the internet was properly affecting the music industry now, like all that Napster and people getting music for free. People just didn't seem to, there seemed to be like there was a change, there was like a sea change basically. And we were always playlisted on Radio 1, and, you know, we were told that was going to happen for the third album. And then not too long before the album came out, there was a big kind of change, I think, at Radio 1, and we were no longer a Radio 1 band, you know, which is kind of fine, but it was sort of a bit of a story for that whole album where we sort of felt like we were heading didn't really kind of, it's sort of, the energy sort of started to peter out a little bit. I guess, you know, things revamp, you know, sort of these big organizations have to keep ahead of the curve and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was a funny album in terms of the way it was received. For us, we didn't feel like it got the props it deserved. And so when we finished touring the end of that year, really, we didn't tour it as much as the other two. We just took our first massive break. So that was the whole of 2010. And then we worked with Gil Norton on the fourth album. So it was sort of like, felt like we'd done, you know, we'd had 3 producers in a row, done different things, and we're like, okay, we want to do like an album that has all the best bits of those first 3 albums. And we knew, because of Gil Norton's kind of songwriting nous, that would be good to work with him again. And we deliberately kind of loosened up production. We like, no gridding drums this time, Gil. No like super layering of guitars. So that to me gives it, that's a really good album. And then after that, we were sort of, I think we would kind of, if you think about it in sort of career terms, we sort of reached the plateau, really. And it meant that we weren't probably able to get exciting producers that we really wanted to work with. So, and we also just didn't really want to go down that whole production route again and work with someone who's going to stick us in a studio. We had our own studio at that point, so we just thought, let's try and do it ourselves. And, you know, the mix is a very powerful part of making a record. So, you know, if we can work with a good mixer, save ourselves some money instead of spending loads of money on a producer, because it can be quite expensive, because they want to hire the best studios and the best gear and the best assistant. Let's cut all that out, do it ourselves, and just get a good mixer and have a more creative approach. So that was, yeah, too much information.
Right, yeah. And then I read on the Instagram that you said your favorite album was probably the last one you did with them, Risk to Exist. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, but I guess that's a lot to do with making it. We made it in Chicago with a guy called Tom Schick, who works in Wilco's studio. And it's so nice there. Their studio is just insane. Like the actual recording space isn't that amazing, but it's basically Jeff Tweedy has collected. I mean, they're huge. Like, this is the thing when you go to America. a big band in America is beyond anything that you can, I don't know, that I've seen before. Like, Wilco to me, like they're a good band, excellent band, and they're pretty big. But when you're big in America, you're big in basically 50 separate countries that each have their own kind of population and economy. So you're making a lot of money, a lot of money. And the National's another one. And so the amount of gear they've got is incredible. And he's got this warehouse space. It's 2 floors. We didn't even go on the other floor, but apparently it was the same. But there's just racks and racks of snare drums, racks and racks of guitar effects pedals, racks and racks of amps, racks and racks of weird guitars and acoustic instruments and synths. And it's like walking into kind of like a weird music library of historical music library of the 20th century, and just like just choose whatever you want to use and go and plug it in. It's just amazing to see that musicians can live that life and achieve sort of that, just a pure immersion in music. Like it was incredible. And yes, so we recorded. I think it was very as little click track as possible, because we played it a lot. We'd rehearsed a lot. Like we were really tight. And kind of content wise, it was quite kind of political, but it was angry, but with the music wasn't particularly angry. We'd sort of try to kind of mismatch the two in a way. I just had a really good time recording it. And then it's just a really good album to play live. Like, I think because we did it before we released it, which is the first time we managed to do that since the first album.
Yeah. Then just like to go to, like, on NME.com and find any interesting stuff. And there's at one point you tried to break a world record for in-store gigs one day or something. You did 5 in one day. Do you remember this?
Yeah, it rings a bell. I don't know if they're even. I'm sure the record for in-store gigs is way higher than that. I'm sure there's bands like Lightning Bolt or someone who's just smashed out a load. But yeah, I think we did in the Northeast.
Yeah.
Was that on the first album or the second album? Or the second?
It says 2012, yeah. So
okay. Oh yeah. So yeah, 4th album. Yeah, I remember now. And like it was like in the Northeast. It was. I mean, that's Newcastle's been really good to Maximo Park over the years. All the gigs we do there are just so good. And people were queuing, hundreds of people, like just to go and see an in-store gig that 20 people would get. Because we had a bit of a gap. I think we kind of sort of felt like, when you have that's a small gap, and then you come back, it's like, oh, they've returned, and where have you been? We're not hardly been, had a little break. That's all. But it was good. It was just really exciting to kind of start at that point again, doing little small gigs and having a bit of fun, trying to do as many as we could in one day.
Yes. And then on that album, a song called Hips and Lips, I think that you wrote. I'm just watching the video with Thomas Tergu, so I just wondered how how did that come about? Is he a genuine Maximo Park fan or what?
I think the director, it was the director's idea, Luke, can't remember his last name. I think he was just like, I know Thomas Turgoose, and he'll do it for a few £100, and Bob's your uncle, you've got a video.
Yeah, fair
So,
play.
yeah.
It's quite funny. It's like the Alan Partridge, like, fanatic vibe to it, isn't there?
Yeah. That was good.
And then playing a rooftop in Newcastle at some point. Did that happen?
Yes, what's that referring to? I'm trying to remember. Well, we played a boat. Played the Baltic Art Gallery. I should remember this, but yeah, there's a lot of things to remember.
Yeah.
There might be a roof come to my mind later.
Yeah, did you get a lot of like, obviously, like you had some massive songs, I can imagine you got a lot of like offers, different corporate offers and stuff. Did you have to be like weigh it up in terms of, money against integrity and all
that? Weren't inundated with offers, to be fair. But it was. I mean, it wasn't like we were gagging for offers, but I remember we were asking like, because we'd see bands doing adverts or whatever, and I think the answer was that because of Paul's accent, it just really limited the interest from people. So I think the biggest thing we did was we went out with Zane Lowe to Ibiza to launch Guitar Hero 4.
that?
And it was a bit like, if Zane's doing it, we'll do it. And I think Zane was like, oh yeah, if Maximo's doing it, I'll do it. And yeah, that was a good little jaunt. But apart from that, it wasn't really something that we had to make much decisions on. So
right, yeah. And then I'll just close with a few questions. Like, we touched on you leaving the band, obviously. Like, was it all quite amicable kind of thing?
yeah, I'd been talking about it for a while. So I think I finally 2000. Well, my final gigs were 2019, but I was actually moved to Australia by then. I moved here in 2018, came back to do that final run of gigs. I think I was just personally getting a bit bored, and like I said before, things started to plateau, around the sort of fourth album. And that's fine. Like the boys are, they're still going, and it's their job. It's their full-time job, and they make a living out of it. And it's the dream, really. And they get to do, they get to make the music they want to make, and see the world. And no one really, they don't have to kind of be told what to do to much extent. But for me, I was just like, I don't want to be doing this now for the rest of my life. I feel like I want to do something different. Like I've kind of done it in a way. And I just started to get interested in psychotherapy. I think I had my own therapy 2010. Being in a band on tour will find the cracks in you. So by the end of that sort of initial run of touring from 2006 really to 2009, realizes I needed some help, and then that just got me really interested in therapy. And then I started studying, did a course in London in 2017, and then when I got here, I didn't start till 2020, but I'm just about to finish a master's in counselling and psychotherapy in November. So I'm on the final run of that. Been doing it part-time through the pandemic in a new country with a new family. It's been tough, but I'm really glad to be doing something new, and also something that I'm kind of in control of. I think that was another thing, was it's essentially the band is sort of it's down to when Paul and Duncan get back together to write songs, and that can take quite a while. It felt like to me there was a lot of downtime that I was kind of wasting, and I didn't really know what to do with it. I tried to do some side projects. I did a band called Caris with Matt from the Rakes, Matt Swinnerton, like an instrumental kind of cosmish disco rock kind of thing. And then just as we were about to release it and do a bit of a tour, he decided he was going to move to Germany, which didn't go down well with the label that we released it on.
All right.
And then I sort of had a bit of a look into sort of writing instrumental music for TV and film, but for one reason or another, it just wasn't really happening. It was a bit too hard, and so I just thought I just need to make a clean break and kind of reinvent myself, I guess, like retrain, look more into being a therapist.
Yeah. Yes. And in terms of like playing that last gig, was it quite good knowing it's your last one? You could kind of soak it up, kind of thing.
It was really good, because I think Paul found it a bit difficult that the spotlight wasn't. The spotlight was on me. It was my gig in a way, and it was all about me. And I think it was a bit weird, like in that respect, but I really enjoyed it, and the guys were. It was good. It was just a good celebration, and it's good to be able to have the space to say goodbye properly in life. You don't often get that chance to build up to a goodbye and sort of have a nice farewell with these people that I've been through thick and thin with, really. And so it was a bit emotional, to be honest, but it was really good to have that space, like I say, to be in it all together and mark the end of that chapter and the beginning of a new one for them.
Yeah. All right, nice one. Cheers for your time. I'll just finish on some fan questions. That's cool. Going from Joe McCluskey on Twitter, who says, "How often did you see Paul not wearing a hat?"
He's worn a hat a lot. Not in the early days. He never wore a hat, and then the hat became a thing, and then he wears a hat all the time.
Yeah. Out of Town says, "What was it like headlining the NME tour with Arctic Monkeys when their first album was released?" I think Colin Nicholas talked about that a bit.
Yeah, it was interesting. What's going on? Sorry. So it was a funny. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to go into too much detail about it, but basically, the Arctic Monkeys should have headlined it, but they couldn't really because their album hadn't even come out. And a few bands were offered it, and we were sort of, I don't know how far down the list we knew it was a bit of a poison chalice, really, because Arctic Monkeys were going to be absolutely massive. So there was mixed feelings, but for us it was like, I mean, how you can't turn down headlining this tour. But I think what really stuck in our throats about the whole thing was the way it was portrayed in the press, and it was essentially like reviews were like, Arctic Monkeys are amazing, blah 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 blah, and then at the end, and Maximo played some songs. And as far as we were concerned, we were headlining, we had all the production, not that we needed it, but like we blew them off stage every night. They were a pretty new band who was sort of, thrust into the limelight, and they're young kids. There wasn't like a huge amount of confidence about their show. They just got on, played the songs, and that was that. And which is, kind of fine, and the songs were great. But we were at the end of a year and a half of touring. We were like a machine, and we came on and put on we put on a massive, energetic show every night. And they filmed the Brixton show, and it's some of the best piece of live footage of any band I've ever seen. It's like we're so ramped up, we're so pumped, like and Brixton's just like lids flying off it. It's just mental. So it was really annoying we never got the credit we deserved for that. I think everyone who came to the tour were like, you were brilliant, you were amazing. But I think we got a lot of new fans from people who come to see the Arctic Monkeys, hung around a bit to see who this Maximo band was, and then stayed right to the end. So, it was good in that respect. But yeah, it was a bit of a bitter pill, and it was right at the end of that sort of touring cycle as well for us. So it ended that whole first album tour on a little bit of a downer. But interesting times.
Yeah. Then Alan 1983 on Instagram says, what were your favourite songs to play live, and what were your favourite venues in the UK?
Selfishly, I like playing my songs. Pretty easy for that one. Velocity's not my song, but the keyboard part's quite an integral part, and it's just a cracker to play live. So that's always a good one. Favorite venues, really think hard now, but as I say, we played every venue in Newcastle. Brixton was really good. I'm just trying to think of. This isn't really a venue, but I remember playing the Queen's Head in Glastonbury on a Thursday, which was the first time they'd had bands on a Thursday. I can't remember what year it was, 2009.
I was reading about that, yeah. Was it where they had to delay the gig because there was too many people there or something?
Yeah. So it was Thursday, and I think by that point, people coming on a Wednesday was pretty standard. So those people they were there for 2 days with nothing to do, waiting for Friday. So they thought, we'll just try it, putting a band on a Thursday and see what happens. And we were that band. And the Queen's Head it's a pretty small tent, basically. And of course, the entire festival are going to come and see this one band. So it was just mayhem. But again, great for us to play. I think probably, thousands of people heard us who never normally come to see us. So, that was a good time.
Yeah. And then just a few that I sent you to finish on. Was there a high point of being in the band, do you think?
I don't think there was particularly notable, one particular point. There's lots of milestones. We supported the Stones in Malmo with an outdoor gig in front of 100,000 people who had no clue who we were and didn't care. But we met the Stones. We got to see the crazy world that they live in. They have a guy who tours with them who's just the pool table guy. And all he does is set up a pool table and then break it down, just if they just happen to want to play pool.
Wow, okay.
It's and I think they each had a cake. I can't remember what the cake thing was. They each had a cake. You went in catering, and then there was mixed cake and Keith's cake. That was very strange. I think personally, one of my high points is when we played the Albert Hall. Mainly because I got to play the organ, and you're not really allowed to play the organ in the Albert Hall. And our tour manager, who was a wily scouser at the time, he slipped someone a couple of £100, and so I was allowed to go up and play the organ, and it was Acrobat, which is a sort of slow organ-based droney song for the first album. And so playing the organ for that was just an incredible experience. It's so big, like you play the chord, you put your fingers down on the keys, and you think, oh, there's nothing happening. And then all of a sudden you just start to feel this sort of noise welling up like all around you. Yeah, it's brilliant. Absolutely amazing.
Yes. Well, so is an organ there that you're not supposed to play?
It's part of the Albert Hall. I mean, if you go to the Albert Hall and you watch a band, you'll see it. It's like a big kind of semicircle above the stage, all the pipes, and then the little cubicle for the key for the organ player, because he'll have his back to the audience, with all the stops and stuff and the pedals. Yeah, amazing.
Yes. Yeah, is there anything you do differently?
Oh, so many things. I think I'd buy more musical equipment, because I didn't really do that. I didn't see the value in it at the time, but I think that was a big mistake.
Why though? What do you mean?
Well, it was cheap. It was cheaper. I bought a Juno in 2000. I think we were doing a second album, and it was like 60 quid or something ridiculous. But yeah, I think just trying to have my own studio, or just have lots of my own gear. I remember watching Hot Chip, who were like, who have an insane amount of gear, and just part of me going, oh, I wish I was in a band like that, where you just completely indulge, and just kind of forget about the reality of touring, all that stuff, and the nightmare of plugging. Because I remember seeing them. I can't remember where it was, but I was looking down on the stage. I think it was in Newcastle on the stage, and like the wires on the stage were insane. It was like you could barely see any floor, and I was like, that's really bad, but it's also really good. Like to sort of have done, being a bit more. But we had this very like stripped down punk attitude of like, it's no frills. We don't have lots of gizmos and effects. But I think, as a musician, especially when you go to somewhere like Wilco's studio, just like, fucked up here. Should have bought more snares or whatever.
Yeah. And then just one I like to throw in, just in case you've got one, just a story about the Gallagher brothers, or just a story about a big name or something. No worries if you haven't.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I couldn't really come up with a huge amount. I mean, we did bump into, I think, Liam when we played Jules Holland. I think it was probably a hootenanny. Maybe the first time we played Jules Holland, and Paul was in the toilets, Liam was in the toilets, and Liam just said, "Oh, I'll do a terrible Liam accent." "Oh, you're that graffiti guy." I was like, "Oh yeah, I am, yeah." I love that song. Love that song. That's not as close as we got to the Gallagher Brothers thing. I remember. I mean, this is I remember we did, when we did Leeds 2000. The first time we did Leeds, I think so, it was 2006 maybe. Pearl Jam played, and Paul is a big Pearl Jam fan, and Dunk actually, and Paul kind of bumped into Eddie Vedder, or I think he sort of slightly engineered that he would be where Eddie Vedder was before or after the Pearl Jam gig at backstage. I remember because it was dark, it was night, and I think he managed to get introduced to him, and he gave him a big hug. And Paul is like, he's not a hugger, and I think he was just really overwhelmed and sort of emotional to finally meet Eddie Vedder. And I think one of the things that Paul loves about Eddie is, he's so earnest. I mean, that's fine. Everyone loves Eddie Vedder because he's just so, just tells it how it is. It's just really like emotional, masculine, and yeah, but I think Paul just got a little bit overcome and just gave him a big hug. That just seemed very out of character for me. To me. Yeah, that was quite funny.
Yeah, fair play. Yeah. Okay, mate, that's it. I'll let you go, but that's brilliant. So thanks for that. I'll give you a shout when it's coming out, whatever.
Mm.
But yeah, it might be a few months down the line. I'm just trying to stagger out episodes a bit at the minute, but yeah, cheers for that, mate.
Yeah, thank you. Good to take a trip down memory lane.
Yeah, spot on. You're like one of the bands that yeah, like I've got a few on my tick list still. Like it was you, the Maccabees I've managed to get. Insanity. Mystery Jets and Block Party now, and it's looking all right.
Good. Glad to hear it. I think it's really important, to be fair, like before we finish, that there is some kind of legacy building happening, and like no one seems to really be doing it. And I think now I'm out of the band, I can kind of speak more about it. But I think if you were to ask the band, and maybe that's why Mystery Jets are not, I don't know, when you're an ongoing concern, a going concern, you just like you're thinking about the next thing, thinking about the next thing. But I think it's really important that era is remembered in the right way, because I mean the thing that's come out, that Meet Me in the Bathroom, and which is American, and I noticed on Spotify, if you put in like Naughty's Indie or something like that, and you get like a playlist, it's quite American. There's like a lot of bands on there that I don't remember being that big at the time, or kind of being more Johnny Come Latelys, and there's a whole, that kind of, from what I remember, being in London 2003, 4, and then being in a band, and it sort of feels like it's getting forgotten about a little bit, like what happened and how it was. And maybe, it is like Conor Nichols was saying, like about the branding of it, of coming up with something. But it seems like the branding it was a hedonistic time, which I guess it was, but it feels like it's doing it a little bit of a disservice, because there was a lot of like art that was happening, and people, that kind of, outside London, these scenes that were being created, that was quite a new thing. And yeah, I mean, it's good, it needs to be done. People need to be kind of remembering, because otherwise, if we don't remember it, it's all done and dusted. So yeah, I think it's important. I think it's important to do something like this.
Yeah. I get the impression that there's films and books in the work, I think, but I don't really know anything. I keep hearing different things, but
yeah,
see what happens.
I mean, it must happen to every era. I mean, if you were in the Beatles or the Stones, you must be very used to it. Just like something happens and it gets repackaged for a new generation, and then it gets repackaged again for another generations. It just gets kind of totally removed from what it once was, just the way it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, as long as people are kind of still going back to what was a very creative time. I mean, there was so many bands. I mean, I've got 7 inches from bands that, like there'd be a lot of bands that just have one song, but like it'd be a great song. Yeah, it was just a great time to be young and to be in a band.
Yeah, it's a great finishing point, mate. Nice one. Yeah, I'll be in touch, mate. Anyway, I'll let you know what's going on.
Yeah, cool.
But yeah,
cheers with it all.
Nice one, yeah. So thanks for I think it was your wife that first got in touch. So
yeah.
Props to her as well.
She's quite a fan. She listens pretty on the regular.
Ah, nice
so,
one.
Yeah, as if there's at least one person that's pleased I've done this, it's Emma.
Well, shout out Emma then. Yeah, nice one.
Yeah.
All right, cheers, mate. I'll leave you to it. Take care.
All right.